Most pad controllers use an analog stick or a D-pad, but the Fightwedge is a home 3D printed controller that uses a slide pad, which gives you some of the benefits of an arcade stick rather than just using a standard D-pad. But is it as good as other pad controllers, and is this the one that you should be using in tournament? Let's talk about it. Before we begin, I just want to point out that this controller was sent to me for the purposes of review, but I wasn't asked to say anything specific about it. I don't have to send it back at the end, and all opinions are my own. Now, the first thing you need to know about this, the Fightwedge version 3, is that there are actually two versions that came before it. We've also got this one. This is the Fightwedge version 1, and as you can see, it has that characteristic wedge shape, and I also have a review video just for this controller. They also came out with a second version. Actually, he iterated on this controller so quickly that before I could get the review out for it, he had already sent me version 3 of this controller, and I have a whole lot of respect for independent controller makers giving us so many options that really we are not seeing from a lot of the big manufacturers. I think you can like print out your own parts to add in as modules, like physical updates to controllers. I think that's a wild concept. Let's talk about the main feature of this controller. Compared to the Fightwedge V1, it no longer has the wedge shape. We now have this controller which has handles, which I absolutely love, because one of the main things I said in my first review for the Fightwedge is that it kind of shakes around when I have it rested on my leg. If it kind of shifts around, I end up pressing diagonal when I thought I was pressing to the side. Here's one I'm reviewing at the moment. When you've got a regular arcade stick, when you press right, it's right. If it tilts a little bit, then you're pressing diagonal. Similarly with this pad, because it has aspects of an arcade stick, you are now using lateral movement in order to actuate these switches. And I'll just show you. If I take the module out, you can actually see the switches inside this controller. There are just 4 mechanical switches placed on their sides so that this little stem on the controller can slide around and push those switches around. And it feels amazing. I don't know if this is the optimal way to play fighting games. I'm still a little bit on the fence as to whether I would want to use a slide pad personally, but if you like it for things like being able to flick the stick like this to get really easy short hops in a game like KOF, that's really cool. But also one of the other features of having this slide pad is it's got this little nub on the inside, and you can like pull down on it in order to bring the controller towards you. So already we've got a highly advanced D-pad system that you just won't find on a lot of mass-produced controllers out there. On the V1, you had to take off this whole front panel to replace the D-pad with something else. This is a circle gate slide pad. If you prefer in a game like Tekken to not have corners because you don't use the corners because you're not down backing all the time like you would in Street Fighter, you might actually prefer this circle pad, so you would just remove the whole front faceplate and put it on this controller like so. With the V2 version of this controller, he decided to cut a line down here so that you could just replace only the D-pad portion. We now also have that same attachment here on the Fightwedge V3. If I take this off the controller like so, I can show you that you can just slide in the new pad, and the main difference is that instead of sliding around laterally, it's a lot more like a traditional D-pad where you just push down on the directions. The human thumb is not designed to shift itself around very quickly. Try this at home right now. I want you to move your thumb up and down like this and see how fast you can do it. And then I want you to move your thumb around sideways like this and see how fast you can do it. If you are like me and you kind of agree that maybe a slide pad's not the most optimal way to play your fighting game, you can go for this D-pad instead. You can actually see it's not moving around sideways, it's just tilting from left to right. And that's kind of how a regular arcade stick works. Let's just get an arcade stick out here. You have a lever like this on an arcade stick, and as it tilts one way, it kind of pushes a switch the opposite direction on the inside. Push right, it moves the pivot left. If I push left, it moves the pivot right. It really does offer you the benefits of a D-pad while using a form factor that you're familiar with, the circle pad. Now, just as a side note, in order for this to actually feel nice, like you've got a full range of motion, there is no square gate when you're using this tilty D-pad instead. That means if you're playing a 2D fighting game and you prefer to be locked in place in the corner when you're down backing to block, you won't really feel that on this controller. It's a little more difficult to know when you're in the diagonal position. This D-pad actually spins around. So like DJ Qbert, you can come in with some guile quotes and scratch to your heart's content on your little mini turntable here, which means that if you're doing a fireball, instead of rolling your thumb from down to forward like this, you can actually put your thumb on the down position on this turntable and roll it around like a turntable all the way around to the side direction. I'm not sure if this is really the most optimal way to play it. Once you've slid your thumb off to the position like this, you're no longer in a neutral position to be ready to press forward for the next move, but it is interesting to have options. Of course, if you don't want to slide your finger around like this, you can just use it like a regular D-pad. Let's move over to the other features. You also have your options buttons and your back button, and you've got your home button, your touchpad button. It's custom firmware, so you can actually change these buttons to your heart's content. If you don't know what I'm talking about with custom firmware, I'll put a link in the description below. We've got X, Y, Z, A, B, C in this sort of Sega style. On the original Fightwedge, I quite liked it because I put this kind of in the middle of my lap. I kind of jabbed this into my right leg like so, and I would play it, and it would, you know, kind of work out balance-wise. But it did shift around. That's been fixed on the Fightwedge V3 because now you put your hand on this controller like this, and when you put your leg like this, if you just kind of rest it on your leg, it's not going anywhere. However, now that you're putting the controller off to the side, you'll notice that your hand doesn't come in at this angle anymore. Now that you've put it off to the side, your hand actually moves over. So weirdly, for this particular pad controller, I think it would actually be better if it had more of a Vuelix style layout. A lot of these pad controllers are coming out like, hey, now you've got all 6 buttons on the front, but we are way beyond the original retro days of having all 6 buttons. Street Fighter V arcade machines started to have 8 buttons on those Vuelix machines. If I just want to use one button to use the in-game shortcuts, I have to use my left hand to press L1 or L2 for those shortcuts. And it's like, I mean, you should just try this at home. Maybe it's not so difficult for you, but I like to dedicate my left hand to only thumb movement. What I'm trying to say is I want 8 buttons on the front. In fact, we could go even further. We could have little extra buttons here, like down here, so that can be a lot like the leverless controllers that have been coming out, where you've got shortcut buttons that you can press with your thumb. One of the more obvious changes to this controller is that we now have a screen here in the middle, and this is just like other GP 2040 CE controllers on leverless. Having a screen here gives you some really important information, like are my buttons set up? Now, if we move to the top of the controller, you can see that the shoulder buttons are more or less the same as before. They are different shapes so that they're actually a little bit easier to access. You don't have to move your fingers quite as far. But more interestingly is the port configuration. So we have a USB-C port here for just plugging into your computer or your console if you've got an adapter. But if you're using a dongle, where's my dongle? Okay, well that's embarrassing. I can't actually find it. But if you have something like the Mayflash Magic Boots adapter, it's a tiny little dongle that you can actually plug directly in here because it's a USB-A port, which most of these dongles tend to be. If you plan to play on console a lot and you need something like PS4, PS5 compatibility, you can just plug it in here and just leave it there forever. If you have it plugged in directly to the controller, you're less likely to lose it, though somehow I still managed to lose mine. And finally, if you flip over the controller to the back, you can actually see we also have a couple new features. We now have some back buttons. I thought it said dope banana, but it's actually banana here, and then if you flip it upside down, this is actually an F button. It says faction. So it's nice to have these back buttons, but I'm going to be really honest with you. I didn't find myself using them because I was trying to test the controller in the hand over position like this. So honestly, pretty feature packed for a $100 controller, and not that expensive when you consider that it's homemade by this one person. But there are a few things that I've noticed with version 3 that I think you should keep an eye on, and definitely keep an eye out for updates from the maker to see if he makes some changes to these things. Alright, sorry, just jumping in on a separate day here because I made a few mistakes while I was talking about the D-pad on this controller, but it is the most important part, so I wanted to get it just right. On the Fightwedge V3, there are no issues with it skipping directions on this original slide pad. So if you want to like go from down forward and then slide through down back into a tatsu, that's one of the main things I do as a test, and it's not a problem on this controller. Where it starts to get a little bit complicated is if you swap out this D-pad and you use this version. This should actually be the better of the 2 D-pads, but the way it's been set up, it's just not quite there yet. The issue is that hitting the diagonals is very, very difficult. The actual area for actuating a diagonal is more like, I don't know, 3 or 4 degrees. It's very, very narrow. And I suspect this is because of the proximity of the switches together. I think if you move the switches further away from each other or closer together, or just increase the surface area of the size of these switches, remember that an arcade stick usually uses like micro switches, and that's actually, it's actually got a very wide surface area, and the actuator, people change the size of the actuator, which is, you know, this part of the stem here. There are many ways to customize an arcade stick so that you have no trouble with diagonals, or you have no trouble with cardinal directions. With this controller, a lot of things are just sort of automatically designed, because in order to use this stem, the switches need to be this close together, and as a result, hitting diagonals consistently is quite difficult. So if I went to jump forwards or jump backwards, I would often get a neutral jump, or I would just get a sort of sideways left or right movement. Now that in itself can be sort of mitigated by slightly pushing forward before you jump. Now first of all, adapting your technique is just not a very efficient way to go about using a new controller. But secondly is the fact that you will also in a 2D fighter be pressing down and back a lot. Even if you're not playing Guile, you need to always be able to press, crouch, and block at the same time at a moment's notice. With this version of the controller, and I'm sure that by the time I've released this video, there will probably be an update, so keep an eye on the official website, it just isn't that easy to hit the diagonals. And so what will happen is I'll go to press down block, and I'll end up pressing down only, which is not blocking. I'll be blocking, but not crouching, and so my opponent will be able to trip me up. Now, the second reason it can be a bit problematic if diagonals are difficult to press on a controller is when you're doing combos. Often you'll see when I've tested these D-pads on pad controllers, I'll do something like a circular motion, like a tatsu, which is down, down, back, back, or a fireball, which is down, down, forward, forward, so these quarter circle motions. But if you do them quickly and you don't go all the way around the periphery of the circle of sort of movement on a D-pad, you just skip the diagonals. So it's like I'll go from like quarter circle back, and I'll get down, and I'll get back, but I won't get the down back, which is an important motion because in a lot of games that use technical motions, they require to have all three of the motions to actually make the move come out. Some games are quite lenient, and depending on exactly what situation you're in, sometimes it will skip through and it will allow the move to come out. But honestly, I wouldn't rely on the input leniency in a game to help you get through like issues with your controller. Now, I'm fully confident that the maker of this controller will find a way to fix this, but it's important for you to know that on the current version 3, the tilty D-pad is not quite there with the diagonals. Another thing I want to point out about both of these modules for the D-pad is that they're quite scratchy on the plastic. Now, because they are 3D printed, this kind of can't be avoided, and he actually says on his official website, I know that this is an issue, but you can get around it with lubricant. Now, I've actually tried, I've got like some lubricant that I use on my Rubik's Cubes. So when you're solving a Rubik's Cube, the lubricant just gets all over your fingers. And the same thing goes with a control pad. I tried to put some lubricant on here to deal with the scratchiness, but the first thing is that actually doesn't really help. Maybe the lube that I chose for this controller, it just didn't actually have much of an effect, and so even sliding it around with the lube, I just felt like there was lube getting on my fingers, but it wasn't actually dealing with the fact that it's still kind of scratchy. There needs to be some sort of active, there needs to be some kind of lubrication. Like if you actually put force on it, you can hear it. This isn't just a lever which is pushing some micro switches, it's a lever with a spring in it, which causes the lever to come back on itself like this. The D-pad design in the Fightwedge 3 doesn't have a spring, and as a result, you're only relying on the force of those switches pushing a stem, which is here, to put the controller back in neutral. I think in order for it to be as responsive and fast for a fighting game, it just needs to be faster. If the screws are very deep inside this plastic, even if you have a long enough Allen key to do this, it's kind of difficult to like see whether you've actually got into the screw or not. Can we just get rid of Allen keys? What is the benefit of an Allen key over a regular screw? I genuinely want to know. For anything that's modular, and I've been saying this about a lot of modular things recently, like they should not be removed with screws. They really need to have like a latch. I should be able to put this module in like this, and then like a jar of jam, I should be able to go one click and just latch it in place. But having to open up the screws is kind of frustrating, and the other thing is like, which screws is it? So really, that's everything I want to say about the controller. It's kind of everything you loved from the original Fightwedge, but it's not a wedge shape anymore. And honestly, I think that's quite a good thing. There wasn't much benefit to it being a wedge shape when it was on your lap. It was only really a wedge shape because it needed to have extra space down here for these shoulder buttons. So even though it's called the Fightwedge V3, fortunately, it's not really a wedge shape anymore, and that just makes it easier to, one, hold because we've actually got proper pad grips. But secondly, now that we've got pad grips, it just stays in place. When you've got it rested on your leg, you can kind of lock it in place. It doesn't rotate, and so you have all the benefits of the original Fightwedge V1, but with, like, you know, it's just kind of grown up into an actual controller that's kind of more usable day to day. You still have these tactile mechanical switches underneath these buttons. You still have that lovely circle slide pad, but with the square gate. You have the ability to move out this module and replace it with something else. You have this port on the back, which you can use just to permanently leave in a dongle. Back buttons in addition to the shoulder buttons you already had. A screen in the middle, and all of this for not that much more than the original controller. One more cool thing is that it just looks really cool. People are going to be like, did you build that controller yourself? Wow, that's really cool. And then that's when you pull off the D-pad and replace it with this, and they'll be like, oh yeah, no, I would definitely go for the slide pad. And you'd be like, oh yeah, well, some people prefer this tilty pad as well. Definitely some interesting innovations that we're not seeing from the big mass-produced controller manufacturers. Personally, I would like to see 8 face buttons on the front, but other than that, another excellent controller from Banana Faction. You should definitely check out their website. I think the main way to purchase them is from the Etsy site. At this particular moment, it looks like they're not actually for sale. Maybe he's closed down orders so that he doesn't have too many orders coming in and they go unfulfilled. So just keep your eye on the Etsy page if you'd like to have one of these controllers made for you. Again, thank you so much, indie controller makers. We appreciate what you do for the community. If you enjoyed this video and you want to check out details about the original Fightwedge, if you want to just hear more about what is possible with the square gate or circle gate slide pad, definitely check that out. Links in the description below. I've been NihongoGamer. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see you real soon.